All right. Hey, folks. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Draft Diary After Dark, where, well, it's not, the sun's still up. The sun's still up. It's not dark out. It's going to get dark. But it's after dark because it's not 3 p.m. It's not 3 p.m. because I wanted to work today, and it's not Friday because I was busy yesterday. And so that's why we're streaming now, which is usually when we'd be playing some games, but we're not because I gotta get this done. We gotta get part 2 done. Part two's not gonna sit around and wait. All right, it's got places to be. I got places to be. I gotta finish up this series. We got a lot left to talk about, and I gotta keep working. Right? We gotta get this stuff going. We gotta get the show on the road. Um, if you're tuning in, another hello. Thanks for tuning in. Um, you might be a little confused. Why are we part way through everything? What chapter is this? What's going on? This is part 2 of episode 25. Episode 25 is split into 2 parts because I talked through the entire first chunk of my notes here, and it was getting close to 3 hours, and my throat was getting sore, so I thought, yeesh, I better go stop talking for a while. And so I did. I've just noticed I forgot a glass of water, so I might actually go grab my water quick before we get started. I don't think there is anything else that's pertinent to the beginning of this second episode. We're starting kind of weirdly in the middle. If you want a synopsis of the chapter, please refer to part 1, the previous episode. If you are confused in any capacity, which you probably are if you're starting in part 2 of episode 25, that's because I'm talking about a book. And I'm talking about a book that I wrote. And that's kind of, pretty, like a little arrogant, a little facetious of me to put that out there. So, up front. But that's just the nature of this series. I'm going over the problems with my first draft here, and I'm making corrections. That's the hope anyways, right? I want to make it better second draft. But as mentioned, I don't have water. And if I don't have water, I'm not going to make it through this episode. I'm going to fall apart within the first hour. So hold on tight, folks. I'm going to go grab a little drinky. I'll be as quick as can be. Okay, how long was that? Was that like a minute? Was that 2 minutes? Was that a speed run? Was that a world record? I sure hope it was. Which one is it? This one. Hello, everyone. I'm back. I got my glass of water. It was sitting right where I left it. Um, that's how things tend to go. Things that you lose tend to be right where you left them, unless someone like stole them and then lost them. In which case, I don't know. That's kind of weird. Anyways, we're gonna dive right in here. We're gonna dive right in, and to bring everyone up to speed where we left off chronologically in the narrative is Teal just met the Wanderer. We spent the I want to say the better part of the latter half of last episode talking about the ways in which I kind of just don't talk about the Wanderer. I give them a really brief description, and I don't really linger on any of their physical appearance, even though how they are presented, and more so how Teal struggles to understand their physical being, is a really important part of their character. So Teal and the Wanderer have just met, and we're gonna open things up here by addressing, and I'll take a small aside here to briefly say that the notes going forward are a little smaller. They might be a little more precise as to this or that. We'll get a good example with this first note here. So if I get a little lost here, sorry. It's because I'm referring to a very specific thing, and I might get off track here because there's a lot to tackle. But I'll try my best, and I'll try not to yammer on too much. I would like to go to bed at a reasonable hour, and it's already 7. And if I'm talking for 3 hours again, I'm gonna miss my bedtime. I get cranky when I miss my bedtime. I get cranky when I miss the bank time too. Let's be fair. You gotta like deposit a check. Oh, hold on. People don't deposit checks anymore, do they? Um, yeah, I guess it really doesn't matter when the bank's open anymore, does it? Hmm. Yeah, that analogy kind of fell face first into the ground. Let's keep going. So Teal and the Wanderer just met. And there's an important note here. It's kind of, it's on my left side here. It's on the right side of your screen. That the Wanderer mentions, you know, that they can see that Teal is thinking. And this is this is a good introductory note. Um, it's good in the sense that the Wanderer is interrupting Teal. However, I think we need to do more, and this is really just going to keep coming up. This is going to be a point that resurfaces again and again, that we need to do more to make some of the aspects of the Wanderer a little more apparent, and this is definitely one of them. The fact that the Wanderer is interrupting Teal. The fact that they're interrupting Teal more specifically to say, hey, what are you thinking about? Almost kind of, and this is another thing that crops up, that we want to give this air that the Wanderer is razzing Teal, that they're teasing her somewhat. Um, there are some minor niggles about speech, the Wanderer's speech, and we'll get into that a little more. Um, Essentially, we need to, because of the length of this chapter, the Wanderer's voice as a character is a little inconsistent. The way they start off talking doesn't really match how they finish off talking, and it's an issue of consistency. So one of the biggest things we have to address here in today's episode is that the Wanderer's voice as a character doesn't really match up. It doesn't line up. There's no through line. I mean, there is kind of a through line, but it waves back and forth along it, and that's not proper. The Wanderer should sound like the Wanderer holistically. However, with regards to this interruption in particular, I want this to be maybe one of the first instances where the Wanderer breaks the fourth wall. And this is going to be a thing, right? This is going to be a reoccurring, if you can't tell, a lot of this is just reoccurring. This is going to be a reoccurring thing with the Wanderer, where it's never outright spoken. It's never completely revealed whether or not they're just talking to Teal or if they're actually talking to the reader. I have here written that they break the fourth and maybe even the fifth wall, that they are just such like a narrative destroying entity, that they almost take this moment to almost speak through Teal to the reader. An idea I had to be super overt about it. I don't know if this will make it into draft 2, but to almost have the Wanderer turn to camera 2, so to speak, that they turn to camera B, and, just kind of like very Looney Tunes style, get a load of this guy. Am I right, folks? Get a load of this chump. Once again, building on the gags, we can have a lot of gags in this chapter because the Wanderer is just a very silly character. And I think that flows nicely, that ties into their character in a narrative sense, because they are meant to be very chaotic. So while the tone of this chapter does sink, while it does grow in intensity, there should be a levity to it that the Wanderer encapsulates and just kind of exudes throughout. The Wanderer is probably one of the greatest characters, one of the greatest like side characters in this book. And there's a reason why chapter 35 is a Goliath, because the Wanderer is just a hoot to write. The Wanderer is just so much fun. Any situation you put them in, they're just like, okay, I am a cackling ball of energy. I make no sense. I can spew anything as long as it rhymes. And so on and so forth. So that's an idea, having the Wanderer have their little gags, have them breaking the fourth wall. But, still being a little more overt and a little more apparent that they are teasing Teal, that they are poking fun at her. We're trying to establish this idea that the Wanderer, right off the bat, is really curious about Teal. And you couldn't see me there. I was using air quotes. Curious, right? And we'll get more onto this notion later. That Teal shows up and the Wanderer's just like, hee hee hoo hoo. Who are you? Right? They just immediately are just super. I can't really say that. I can't really say they're focused on Teal because that's another thing we're going to get into. But their attention has been grabbed, so to speak. And this is a thing I need to kind of say up front that we learn later on. If you haven't read chapter 35, sorry, spoilers. This is the spoiler alert. Alert. Wow. Wow. That's as good as a siren as I can do. I guess I could have zoomed in. That would have been a funny gag. Anyways, whatever. We learn later on that the Wanderer already knows that what Teal is thinking, and they also pretty much know everything about her. But we need to build this idea, both for the reader and for Teal, that the Wanderer right off the bat is kind of just kooky. That they're kind of just silly, and they're a curious individual who wants to know about Teal. So that later on we realize, oh, wait a minute, and this might even be a thing that doesn't crop up until a second reading, we realize, oh, hey, wait, no, actually, you already knew this. You already knew everything about Teal. You can read her mind. You know what she's thinking. You know what she's doing. You know what she's done. Why are you pestering her? Why are you teasing her about, like, oh, what are you thinking? What's on your mind, Teal? Go ahead and tell me. It's fine. We can be friends. Just, just tell me what's on your mind, Miss Evergarden. Oh, how do I know your name? Don't worry about it. Don't. I read it in the title of the book. Oh, what book? Oh, don't worry about it, honey. Don't worry about it. There's nothing to worry about. Where are you from? I love your cloak. Who made it? Actually, don't tell me. I already know. Um, yeah. No, we want to build the sentiment that the Wanderer is toying with her. And that might not be something that's read immediately, not something that like I was, paradoxically, I was just saying, hey, we should make it more apparent. We should make it more apparent that they are effing with her, but it's not really revealed until later on when the reader and Tio come to terms with, oh, I think maybe they weren't asking those questions to be serious. I think maybe they were just asking those questions to be a jerk. And maybe they weren't even being a jerk. Maybe they were kind of just goofing around. It's hard to tell with the Wanderer. But those are some initial notes to do with this. You're thinking, idea. This idea that the Wanderer's prying at Teal, and they're kind of just doing that for their own amusement. So we get into the Wanderer's voice, and this is I'm gonna kind of skimp here, but just try to stick with me for the time being. So first and foremost, we need the Wanderer's voice in a physical sense, and in the notion of what Teal hears when they emit sound. Does that make sense, everyone? We need that aspect of what the Wanderer sounds like to be described a little more creepy, to be creepier and more disjointed. We need to stress this idea, and it's kind of in the text, that the Wanderer sounds as if there's more than one voice coming out of them, but we need to stress the idea that these voices, that the sounds that the Wanderer uses to communicate are kind of off, that they're uncanny, but also that they're not completely in unison. Some of them might be slow, some of them might start too early, some of them, some of these utterances might be feral or might just be completely indescribable. Some of them might sound robotic. Any like point of the spectrum of clarity is fine, but as long as we kind of describe it as such, and we need to, on one hand, describe this lack of consistency while marrying it with the idea that all of these voices are harmonious, that the Wanderer somehow is still able to communicate clearly and efficiently with Teal with one singular voice, but that one singular voice is comprised of many what's the word, what many many like cogs. There's many cogs that make up the machine that is their voice. I'm stuck on the word. I know it starts with a D, kind of like a diaspora, yeah, whatever. Anyways, that's kind of how their voice is. And it's important to note here in the notes, and as I'm talking, that this is, like I said, what Teal perceives of their voice. It is the distillation, this decoction of communication, right? This is what Teal hears. What the Wanderer's actual voice sounds like, completely unknowable. Completely just, it is beyond the realm of which Teal as a being can comprehend. But what she does hear is, the manifestation of what could possibly be their voice. Likewise, when describing it in the text, and when I say it, I mean the Wanderer's voice, when describing it, we should liken it to that of a bell, something that has a clarity to it, but has sort of a resonance, an echo, a disjointed tone that lingers on beyond the initial utterance. It has a sweet quality, sort of a sonorous tone, but there's something hidden behind it, right? You can hear a bell in the distance and think, oh, what a lovely bell, what a lovely chime. But in actuality, if you were to go and physically see that bell, it would be a monolithic hunk of metal in a tower somewhere far away. And that's sort of the idea in an illustrative sense, what we're trying to build with the Wanderer here. We want their voice to have this grandeur behind it, this sort of unknowable, unfeasible quality. Something that kind of, terrifies Steele, something that sort of scares her, something she's like, I don't want to grapple with why your voice is that weird, because I'm worried if I do, I might end up in in water that's a little too deep for me. Just as an analogy here, I have, and this is really the only thing I could come up with that makes sense in our realm, is maybe if you were having a conversation with an opera speaker or an opera singer, right? Somebody, this person you're talking to is capable of these raucous tones, of these like ear-splitting high C's. They can sing that, right? And you're just talking to them and you're just having a conversation. You're like, ha 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 ha. Your voice is powerful and could destroy me, I guess. Hee hee. I hope you don't do that to me. And that's kind of the vibe. That's kind of the vibe we want from the Wanderer here, is that Teal hears this clarity, right? She hears the ringing of the bell, she hears the opera singer talking, but she knows that behind it there is something behind a veil of sorts that she doesn't want to pass through, because it's kind of scary. But it's a thin veil. It's like it's silk. You can see through it a little bit. It's not completely obfuscating what lingers beyond it. So that's a note on the Wanderer's voice itself. We get into a little bit more of their speech. And as mentioned, we're really not maintaining a consistent voice for them. Between now and later, and even between like now and the end of the chapter, their speech, the way in which they speak and inflect, is really different. And that's mostly due to the chapter just being long and me coming back to it over the course of a month or however long it took me to write chapter 35. Chapter 35 was one of the few I actually deleted a bunch of and went back and rewrote. So there's like, you can clearly see at some point, it's just like the Wanderer just starts talking differently. And that's something I need to address, right? This needs to be one continuous, homogenous project going forward. Their voice especially needs to be consistent. I basically said the second point there. They really drop this idea. They have this whole rhyming scheme. They have these staccatos and these melodic, mellifluous passages that they speak. There's no theatrical, bombastic delivery to their lines. They really just start off being pretty simple, and then they kind of build up to this frenetic energy, which isn't completely wrong, but I don't think it's serving them as a character. I think they can change their tone, right? They can build to a frenetic energy, but they should still be speaking relatively along the same lines as the chapter progresses. Yeah, so yeah, like Robin just says, they do build up, right? There is this impression that they are kind of consistent, right? Because of the laughter, because of their little vocal ticks. It does ground them. However, especially with regards to the rhyming, to their antics, there's nothing at the start. It is really just something that I shoehorn in. I'm just like, oh yeah, wouldn't it be funny if they start rhyming? And it is, and I love it, but that should be a consistent theme. Why are they not rhyming here? And then they just start rhyming in the middle. That's kind of silly, don't you think? Um, and this last point is me just saying, unlike the narrative, right, that we've talked about how the narrative lacks a consistent voice. Unlike the narrative, the Wanderer has this through line. The laughter, like I just mentioned, they're kind of zaniness. They wiggle back and forth along this through line, but they are still grounded as a character. Going forward, however, I think we need to constrict that somewhat, and in doing that, their presentation as this being, as this force, will ring out a lot truer. Truer? More true? No big deal. So just something we need to fix. The Wanderer needs to speak like a character who exists. Even though they are kind of crazy and all over the place, just reading it would be more comfortable, and what readers will get from the character will be more tangible, right? Because I'm already dealing with a character who doesn't make a lot of sense, who is pushing the boundaries of a meta narrative, and I need to ease that as much as I am possibly able, and giving them a more consistent voice, having them play with their own rules, right? They have speech rules, and constraining them via that idea is, I think, one of the better ways we can present the Wanderer with their qualities, with their various sentiments, without derailing them entirely as a character. Um, Somewhat related, they don't really act a lot as they talk. There are times when they're doing things, um, but they don't they don't maintain a consistent atmosphere, a consistent pressure in the conversation between Teal and the Wanderer. The Wanderer, given their energy, given their state, given their propensity to um, play tricks, right? We're trying to build this idea that they're kind of a trickster, that they're kind of a gremlin, they're a little bit of a shit ass. They would likely interrupt Teal. They would likely interrupt themselves. Um, and this would inject a lot more energy into their character and to the narrative overall. Um, we can, knowing the Wanderer, they can even just interrupt the narrative as it's going along. Maybe the narrative is trying to describe something, and the Wanderer just cuts the narration off and goes, no, 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 let me finish that. Here's how it was. Um, and we can transition this idea into the notion, and this is something that crops up a few times as we're going to be talking here tonight, that the Wanderer should be kind of unfocused on Teal. We have this idea that the Wanderer is kind of this shifting, undulating being, that they're maybe not super present right now physically. And that should be reflected in their movement, in their conversation, in what they're doing. We can have these little actions and these little interruptions reflect this idea that maybe they're not consistently here, quote unquote. As mentioned, they're not really focused on Teal. There might be other things that are kind of nagging for their attention. Um, they might suddenly look away. Teal might be speaking and they might look away. Teal might be speaking, they might just start laughing. The narration might be going on, and they might take an aside to say a line, and Teal will react like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Why are you talking about papayas? And the Wanderer will have to snap back and go, oh, I'm terribly sorry, Miss Teal, Miss Evergarden. Don't mind me. I was just carried away in the moment. And in air quotes, the moment. Which moment? They don't get to explain. Teal won't get it anyways. We should build this idea, this constant twitchy, kind of spasmodious energy, this persona to the Wanderer, as if they're not able to sit still. And Lord, I know what that's like, but I'm sure a lot of you do as well. But we're trying to build this idea that there's maybe more than one thing, maybe more than this conversation with Teal on their mind at any given time. And this should be something that's drawn out right at the beginning, right? This should be really apparent right up front that the Wanderer's twitchy, they're weird, they're unable to remain still. It's almost as if they're like, like the static of a TV. They're kind of struggling to stay in a consistent plane. However, as the conversation proceeds, as we get deeper into the chapter, this kind of is something that should gently fall off. Um, and apparently it should be completely gone by the time of something, but somebody has censored that out for my own sake, I guess. So we'll just keep trucking ahead. Um, on the flip side of things, we got Teal, right? We got Teal here, and she should be a little less refined. And I mean that in the sense of decorum. She should be presenting this exhaustion, this lethargy, something that has been eroded, right? She's gone through the mountains, she's gone through the trail, she hiked through the hills and the fog. She had a moment where she was really questioning whether or not she's actually awake or in reality. And she finds this strange little gremlin after hearing music on the air. And Teal's just at this point is so exhausted. She's just so tired that she can't even present herself, right? She can't even fake it. Her mask at this point is just a crumbling mess. Um, and her charisma, as a result of that, just like she doesn't have the energy to project, to even really care. Um, there should be little flakes of it, right? Like she's still struggling to be good natured, to be kind, to be amicable, but we really need to push this idea that Teal, even just having a conversation, is taxing for her. Um, Sort of like I just did, her speech should be marred by pauses, by and ums, by these lethargic staccatos and steps and stutters. Maybe not so much stutters, but she should be struggling, right? As if her mouth is just unable to keep up with her mind, and her mind isn't really going that fast either. So just something to be aware of. We do kind of reflect that um, in some of the things Teal speaks, right? Like she's not super forward. She is a little laconic throughout the chapter, but especially right off the hop before she's really engaged in the conversation that she and the Wanderer are having. It should be apparent that she's really freaking tired, that she just doesn't have the energy to maintain. Uh, uh, like on a good day where she have just woken up from a nice nap, right? Like she intended to, and talk to the Wanderer. Okay, maybe she would be having an easier time in understanding. Sure, her patience would be there at least. She could muscle through it. In this state, she should just be like, oh man, I cannot with this little thing. Like, what, can you just sit still for 3 seconds, please, while I blink? Can you just stop shifting? Can you just speak plainly, please? I am so tired right now, right? We should get this idea that Teal is actively aware of just how tired she is, and she cannot bring herself to churn out the energy needed to. I don't want to say deal with the Wanderer. She's not dealing with them, but even just to exist in their presence is draining for her in a state like this. Um, so talking about speech, we mentioned the Wanderer's voice with regards to the sonic perception of it, but I want to talk a little bit about their um, actual written physical speech as it is on the page. Um, and it's something we need to adjust. Um, and this is kind of getting into the nitty gritty. I'm not going to dive in super deep because if you can read ahead, there we get into some real beefy stuff. So I'm going to skim over most of that. However, um, a big thing and something that I will bring up is that the presentation of their speech via font should be as erratic as they are. It shouldn't follow the rules. The Wanderer For instance, not for instance, the wanderer here should really make their own rules, and they always kind of make their own rules. They don't have to follow the gimmicks I am playing by because they're the wanderer. They do what they want. They are beyond Teal, but also they are kind of beyond the book, right? There's this idea that they're really here because that's just where they are in the plot, and because they're here, they can kind of do what they want. And we're doing this, right? We're kind of blurring the lines of a structured narrative to insinuate that the Wanderer themselves is kind of bending the lines of what is real and what is fiction. Just as some examples, they might speak from center aligned or right aligned. They might even censor some parts of their speech. They might speak with symbols. If you've ever read some poetry by E. Cummings, E. Cummings really incorporates a lot of parentheses and punctuation in evocative ways. And I think the Wanderer could definitely go about that. They might even speak in like weird symbolic poems at one point. Maybe we'll bust out the wingdings. I don't know. I don't think we'll ever go that far, but they should have creative reign over how they speak. We should be able to morph the font freely, almost to just give this air that, like, yeah, the Wanderer can just do what they want. They can speak, they can enunciate, they can orate in whatever way they can. And really, Teal is just hearing their words and is kind of having this vibe of like, oh, that's weird. Why don't you talk normal? How are you doing that with your voice, right? We should have a how are you doing that with your voice kind of moment. Do y'all remember Julie Powers from Scott Pilgrim? How whenever she sweared, there was a sensor beep, and then what the running gag was, how do you do that with your voice? We should kind of be having that sort of vibe here. That Teal knows there's something wrong, but she can't describe it in words, and she is just unable to really perceive the uncanniness, the disturbing quality that is the Wanderer's intonations. Yeah, I guess I just said that. Yeah, I guess I just said that point that, Teal can hear, but she can't wrap her head around how the Wanderer is enunciating. She is like, it's almost like the words are just jammed into her head. She heard them on the wind and she knows what they mean, but she didn't really get it. Whatever. I guess I'll just reply. Um, and like I said, this is just to exemplify in a physical way, in a visual way, that the Wanderer is twisting Teal's reality, that they are both taking the narrative and Teal and just kind of toying with them. And this is the part I'm really going to skip over, right? We need to reflect this in the way the Wanderer speaks. And a big part of that is their usage of pronouns and the rules in which they engage in a textual representation of their conversation. I'm not going to dig into this. Essentially, it's just that the Wanderer has rules. The Wanderer has different rules based on how or what they're talking about. They even break these rules. They don't follow their own rules when it's convenient because breaking the rules is funny. I've got some examples here. If you really want to read them, if you want to pause the video and look through all of this, you can check out all of the rules. This is a for me section. I'm going to reference this heavily in the second draft because this is how the Wanderer is going to speak, how they're going to refer to things and other individuals in their speech to amplify this quality that they're not really here, that they're not really part of where Teal is, and yet Teal is still perceiving them in this moment. Perhaps because the Wanderer wants to be perceived, perhaps because it's just been fated or destined to happen. We don't really get into that very much. Maybe we will in the second draft, but for now, what I'm just trying to get across is that they speak kind of funny, and that's just how it is. That's just how it's going to be. And that's just what you're going to put up with. All right. This chapter, if you think it's bonkers now, it's going to get more bonkers, ladies and gents. Thanks for coming. I hope you enjoy chapter 35, draft 2. It's going to be a ride. It's going to be a ride and a half. And no, you cannot get off. So following their engagement, right? I know we basically just talked about the same part. Following their engagement, they have a little, they introduce one another. They get to know each other a little bit. They're starting to Teal is anyways. Teal's starting to get the sense for like, oh, this guy's creepy. This guy's weirding me out. And yet they're being nice to me. They're being amicable. Why are they being nice? This is strange. Teal feels really put off, and she knows it's more than just her lack of energy. But going forward, um, none of their conversation is wrong. But uh, how do I want to put this? It's difficult to describe, and we'll get to it in a second. But like none of what they're saying is wrong. I don't hate any of the conversation that they're having here. They talk a little bit about the concertina. They talk about the Wanderer plays some gags on Teal. They kind of tease her. That's all fine and proper in character. But we need to adjust these segments based on how the Wanderer speaks, and the past five or so notes really come into play here because uh, this is all stuff we've mentioned. These are just aspects of the Wanderer that are missing that need to be adjusted as we go forward. But also, because of that, a lot of this is just going to be rewritten. Pretty much this whole section here is just going to be redone because of that first point, because I need to address how the Wanderer speaks on such a core level. A lot of this is just going to be scrapped and built from the ground up, which kind of sucks. But given how much more force the Wanderer, I hope, is going to have in the second draft, I think it'll be worth it. There's nothing really here worth keeping. I think if we inject any new gags, it'll be preferable, right? They'll service the points we've been talking about, like how they're going to, almost talk through Teal, how they're going to appear manic, how they're going to appear inconsistent and unstable. Anything we add will serve those points, while like taking away what we have doesn't detract anything. We get a little bit into how the Wanderer moves and acts, and that's fine. Those are maybe like little crumbs we can keep for later. But there's nothing really dense, really packed, like this part about talking about what a concertina is. Of all the things here, I think that's maybe what'll stick. This whole thing about Teal thinking that needs to be redone. Um, the Wanderer finally gets into their rhymes. Teal starts to get a little suspicious. These tones are right, but nothing they say in particular needs to stay. There is at one point, where is it? They're talking about names down here. They're talking about Teal's name and uh, the names of others. And I do really like that the Wanderer here drops, like name drops some characters as they're referred to in the text, solely to how they're referred to in the text. I really like that, right? They use these monikers of the characters that we've been building up, or that we've used in chapters previous. And I think that's really fun. If there's one like core aspect here, it's that kind of a gag. It's not really a gag. It's kind of just like we're revealing that the Wanderer is maybe a little more aware, that they're a little like beyond the fourth wall than Teal is even prepared for. And I think that sort of notion is a really good clue to readers that like, hey, yeah, why do you think the Wanderer A knows about these other people? B knows about these other people that Teal specifically has talked to in her recent past, and three is referring to them in a way that suggests, yes, they know exactly how Teal thought of them, exactly how Teal addressed them, right? Like mentally, right? Because Teal almost never uses the word. She almost never uses the moniker of the chapter. And but it is something she thinks. It is always something that she kind of addresses internally. Or it's something that the other individual has kind of denoted themselves. They've kind of said, oh, I'm the oracle. Oh, I'm the dealer. Or in other instances, Teal just assumes. Teal's like, oh, that's a guard. Okay, that's a, you know, shoot, I'm forgetting the one person's name. The merchant, right? She addresses the merchant. She's like, oh, this person's building. They're using bricks. I guess they're a mason. Um, there's an instance, right, where she never really. Teal never really comes to the conclusion that the saint is a saint. It's just that somebody else kind of referred to her as being saintly, and so now she's just like, okay, well, I guess they're a saint, right? And so using these ideas that no, the Wanderer knows very specifically what each character was called in their chapter moniker, we almost have this sort of Sans Undertale moment. Um, and y'all know what that means. Boop boop boop. Just kidding. I'm not going to go there. I wish I had a soundboard. That'd be funny as hell. But alas, yeah, we kind of have this like character out of the narrative moment where, yep, they know what these other characters are called. Why do they know? Well, we'll get to that in a little bit. So, if anything that needs to be kept here, those are some flakes that I think deserve appreciation. Um, During this segment, something that I kind of want to drop is that the Wanderer they admit, like, yeah, I kind of know things. I kind of know things that maybe I shouldn't. They're way too on the nose about it. And I don't like that. They just come off way too strong. I think they would eke out as much of this teasing of Teal that they possibly could, because for them it's just the best thing, right? The greatest form of merriment is finding a silly third dimensional being and just messing with them, just screwing with them, right? And we should get that impression immediately that the Wanderer is kind of finding some enjoyment in just heckling Teal, of just making her life a little bit miserable right now. But they don't, right? They really just come out and say it. Ah, yes, I know more than you, dummy, stupid third dimensional being. How dare you not understand my complex and vast, infinite what's that called? Omnipression? No, that's when they're everywhere. Omniscient, right? They know everything. Whatever, y'all know what I'm talking about. Um, they really just come out and say that, and that's dumb. They might hint at it, right? Part of their teasing, it's likely that they're just going to hint at it with really elusive language, but they'd never outright just tell Teal. That would be too easy and no fun. Um, and so we can proceed forward with smaller notes, right? We're getting into smaller things. We talked about the Wanderer and language, and a lot of the rest of this hunk of notes are going to pertain to a little more specific things. Not all of them, but some of them, right? For example, this next note is that the Wanderer should really inflect in very strange ways. We get some of this when the Wanderer talks, right? We get some of this with their rhymes and with their pauses and with the way they dot their parlance with laughter. But we should be more careful about setting up very specific and various kinds of utterances for the Wanderer. Sometimes they might be really dignified, right? They might try to emulate Teal in her quite dignified manner of speech. They might be really casual, right? They might just start calling her bro or dude or, a home slice, right? Maybe at one point they're talking like a 90s hip hop artist. Who knows? Sometimes they're teasing here, Teal. Sometimes they're much more childish. Sometimes they might just sing. Sometimes they might efface themselves and kind of, try to be shy or coy. But throughout this all, there should be this air that they are just effing with Teal from start to finish. They are out here to enjoy themselves, and they are enjoying themselves by tormenting this poor little mortal being. This is an example I have where we might punctuate some of the things they say to give it a rhythm, sort of a cadence to how they speak. Um, by separating the and I'm gesturing to the left side of my screen here. I'm gesturing to my right side here, at the top left of the screen. For anybody who's just listening, if you want to look and read at what I'm talking about, we have this instance where they're chafing Teal, and they're punctuating their passage by breaking apart the syllables. There we go. Gosh, I was struggling with that word. They're breaking apart the syllables here as they have this kind of like sing-song nursery rhyme, right? almost to give it a little bit of a song to it. We're showing that they're childish, but in being childish, they're kind of talking down to Teal, and in talking down to Teal, they are just completely taking the piss. And that's great. That's wonderful, right? We want them to just be an absolute shit disturber from start to finish. Um, these are some like important notes regarding specific instances in which the Wanderer might annoy Teal. For example, we can have them use her Elvish name, something she pretty much in draft two, she like half utters it, but she half utters it to somebody who just doesn't know Elvish. Um, and it's something that the readers kind of get to indulge in, but it's absolutely something that the Wanderer should not know, right? We can even have them present it in the proper Hanzi as opposed to like any pinyin to reflect her name. Just like, nope, the Wanderer says it. The Wanderer just belts it out in perfect Elvish. There it is. Bam. It's right in the text. Maybe they can even like list it vertically as it would be written in Mandarin Chinese, just to absolutely push this point home that like, yep, they know her name and they know how it's written, and they're also kind of aware of the meta narrative that like, yeah, no, it's those are Chinese characters, and I'm going to write them as they should be written. Another instance might be to have the Wanderer make references to Teal's ring, right? Teal's ring, this is something we mentioned, is something she discovers with the Oracle, and that she kind of comes back to again and again until she realizes, oh, okay, wait, maybe this thing is more important than I thought, but I still can't really remember why. The Wanderer should absolutely tease her about it. Just be like, oh, how's that ring feel? Is it getting heavy on your hand, Miss Evergarden? Little things like that. They might refer to it as the ringing ring, just to like piss her off even more. That they know, yeah, your ears have been ringing and you're kind of looking for that stupid little bell, aren't you? Haha, that's funny. Um, just these little notes, right? We can inject so many little things, so many little fencing jabs that the Wanderer has the Teal's completely defenseless for. Um, they might make allusions to Teal's aversion to touch. They might kind of poke fun at how she's looking pretty disheveled, how she's cut all over the place, how her attire has become worn and ragged. You know, they know Teal's really vain. They know these are things that are bothering her that she's never really expressed properly. But here they are in their own little segment here, having, you know, the time of their life by pissing Teal off, by bringing up these things that are, you know, Teal has really compartmentalized and sealed away. But they're just ripping open these compartments and going, hey, doesn't it suck? Doesn't it suck that your favorite cloak and your favorite skirt and your favorite leggings and your favorite boots are all just scuffed and muddy and terrible? When was the last time you brushed your hair? Hmm? Ah, oh, geez. It sure sucks that that pretty little face of yours, that your, you know, your nice little freckles are all cut up now. Huh. It sure would be a shame if you were proud of your, like, soft, demure, round face or something. That would be terrible. Um, they might make these allusions, these references to Teal's journey be like being like floating along a river, something that Teal has come back to again and again. She's had these illusions, and we've talked about it in pretty much every draft diary that we need to build these illusions, these references to Teal thinking, oh, geez, like I feel like I'm just floating along. I feel like I'm just being cast adrift on a river. And this is something the Wanderer can just straight up bring up, right? We're building another uh, instance where the Wanderer is just referencing the text, just straight up. How should they know about the text? Well, they just do because they're the Wanderer. Um, yeah, we can also have them just use names, right? We can just have the Wanderer call Teal names that they should absolutely have no idea about. Um, we can have them use like this is sort of a bit of a spoiler, but there's a special name that Teal and their significant other have, you know, like what do you call that? I guess kind of like a pet name would be the English equivalent of it. Um, you know, kind of just a cutesy name, a cutesy nickname for one another, and they might use that secret nickname for Teal. They might even use like her given name. They might even call her her given name, or maybe use her style name instead to just be like, "Yep, I know your names." Maybe they'll have like weird, what do you call that? When recessive, when you lock away a memory, they might just pull something like that out and be like, "Oh, how about that name that you were, called in the third grade that brought you shame and humiliation? How about if I just call you that right now?" Right? We have so many tools at our disposal that the Wanderer can use that there just aren't right now, and I think going forward, it would build the ideas we're trying to lay the foundation down. It would build on top of them really well. Um, this next part is just like some nitpicking, but um, and they're valid edits, they're valid revisions, but they're really only valid if I keep the text as they are. And unfortunately, we're just going to be changing most of this, so this next bit doesn't really even matter. You can kind of just tune me out for about 5 minutes and come back in once I'm done. Um, the order in which Teal has these revelations is weird, right? We get to them talking a little bit more, and this has to do with Teal coming to terms with the fact that the Wanderers may be something greater, something like beyond just a mortal, right? She starts having this idea that maybe the Wanderer is kind of like an imp or a demon or something like from a heavenly plane, some sort of strange immortal. However, the way in which the ideas are presented doesn't really make much sense. At first, the Wanderer reveals that they know Teal's name, even though Teal's never spoken it to anyone. Teal's never revealed their name except to the Vagrant, and the Vagrant was clearly not this guy, so what gives? Um, and she's kind of freaked out by that, right? And we build and we build and we build that Teal is more and more freaked out by the Wanderer. And it gets to a crux where the Wanderer reveals her name, her elvish name, right? And that's kind of weird. That's kind of strange. But Teal's kind of just like, whatever. What's going on? Like, what? Maybe it isn't her elvish name, but they reveal that they know her name. And, you know, she kind of just shrugs it off, right? I don't even know how I'm gonna dive into this. Like I said, it doesn't really matter because a lot of this is gonna be scrapped. But we have this instance where the Wanderer points out something super specific to Teal. They point out that she has these bright green locks of hair that she kind of tucks away, that she hides, and Teal at that moment is pretty flabbergasted. She's like, how do you know about that?" But then immediately after, the Wanderer is like, "And also, I know your name." And that's when Teal goes off the deep end, right? How does that make any sense? That like a lesser point of revealing, a lesser point of truth, that the Wanderer's like, "Oh yeah, I know your name." Wouldn't that kind of be a little more blasé? Wouldn't that kind of be like, okay, well, anyone could know my name, right? Teal could reason that away. But for somebody to know, right, for anyone really, aside from her immediate family, to know about these patches of hair, these locks of hair that Teal goes out of her way to discreetly hide, wouldn't that freak you out more? Wouldn't that be a revelation that's really sinister? Wouldn't that freeze her blood? I don't know. I mean, I do know it would, right? But the order in which we have it right now is just stupid and dumb. I think these points should probably stay, especially the thing about Teal's hair, right? That's kind of like a big secret thing, a big secret reveal. And like, we should just hang our hat on that. We should be building up to that moment where it becomes apparent that, oh, the Wanderer really does just know a thing about Teal that literally no one else except for, maybe her parents and like her sisters might not even know about it, right? This is something that Teal's probably hidden her whole life because she's kind of ashamed of it. And so next to no people know about it, especially not weird shawl wearing, concertina playing, floating imp hat people, mask wearing fellas. And so we just need to take these, I don't know, these nice ideas and pull them out and set them aside for now and say, okay, just stay there for a moment while I reconstruct the entirety of this chapter. Thank you. And I'll tip my hat towards them. But like I said, yeah, this chapter is getting gutted. So, oops. Um, Things kind of transition after that to where they start talking about the swain. The pair of them start talking about the swain, and really, when I say talking, I mean the wanderer is just teasing Teal about them. And I like that transition. I like the chain between here's something that the wanderer is essentially just constantly escalating the level of severity of their torment, right? And because they are really building to that, it starts off as being pretty playful, but by the end of things, they are just tormenting Teal. And I like that. I like this link in the chain that the wanderer is willing to just like press that Teal maybe knows she has a romantic partner, but can't remember them. And the Wanderer's totally just willing to play into that. Like, yep, no, I am just going to bring that up and cause you heartache because it's funny to me. Um, I think it might be good before we get into that to have maybe more of a beat about her family. As an added step in her torment, the Wanderer might bring up her sisters. They might name drop Azure or Indigo or maybe one of her elvish relations. But the fact that they bring up the Swain in particular, I think, is really good in this moment. Um, However, the reveal of the Wanderer knowing of the Swain is a little too sudden, given the current version. Um, they kind of just straight up, they kind of just say to Teal, yeah, of course I know him. Of course I know who you're thinking about, of who you're pining for. And I don't think they would be so forward. I think the Wanderer would quite likely be a little more saccharine, a little more not seductive. I mean, they might try to be a little seductive, but they might be a little more seditious, a little more caustic, a little more biting in their approach, right? Because they're trying to torment Teal. They're kind of playing with her, right? The Wanderer in this moment is the cat, and Teal is the mouse, and this cat is just swatting that mouse around. But they're a cat who's been around the block, right? They know how to play with a mouse. They ain't gonna kill him. They're gonna sit there and wait for the mouse to twitch again, right? And even if they see a couple twitches, they're gonna make sure that mouse gets back up on their feet before they smack them across the room again. And that's not really reflected here, unfortunately. The Wanderer just gets straight to the point, and that's wasted opportunity. It's in this moment that Teal really comes to the conclusion that the Wanderer must be a demon or an imp or something. Um, and it too comes out of nowhere. It comes too suddenly. This should be something that should be developed as Teal is talking to the Wanderer. It should be a thought that she's spinning, that she's like, okay, she can go from you're weird to I think maybe you're maybe not immortal to I think you're maybe evil. Like she might start thinking, are you from the nine hells? Like what's going on? How are you knowing these things, and why are you being kind of maleficent about them? Kind of evil, kind of untrustworthy. Why are you being weird? Like you have no reason to be mean to me, and yet you're kind of being loathsome. What's up with that? To the point in which she's like she's convinced herself like this dude is either some kind of like heavenly spawn or some like king of hell or just some crazy like some magic immortal, right? There is no like none of what they're saying or doing makes any sense. They are just doing things that are unbelievable. And these are the steps she should take. She shouldn't just come to this point and go, oh, demon. Oh, it's a demon. I'm scared. They're going to get me. They're going to steal my hat. Right? It should be something that she builds up. She should build up to the idea that they're going to steal her hat, not just jump to it. That's silly. She should be certain at first, but as the Wanderer kind of reveals more of what they're capable of knowing, so too should Teal uh, um, mold and form this idea, right? She's pressing it into shape, and it should take shape, right? But it's even at this point, it isn't concrete. She hasn't fired whatever she's been working with. She hasn't put it in the kiln yet. Um, but she is becoming more certain that like, yeah, you are a lawful evil kind of entity, and I don't know if I trust you. You might be a devil. I'm not sure. I don't trust you, little man. I don't trust you and your nice shawl. Um, and along the same line, right, talking about how the Wanderer is maybe a little evil. We're so close here in these segments to um, building the Wanderer as a more robust character. We're so close here to having something really much more tangible, right? Much more multifaceted. As it is now, as it stands in its current form, the Wanderer is just kind of zany and all over the place. But we're really starting to build at a more nuanced character here. And it's here as we're building the Wanderer's sinister intentions that we describe them as being hard to understand, as being nebulous. And while I don't think that's wrong to say, I think that the intonation of that, right, the things that readers will get from something like that isn't quite right. What we're describing is the Wanderer is just too airy to understand. Teal can't clasp at the idea that is the Wanderer. However, like that in itself as an idea is correct, but saying that in the book, I worry might go against what we're trying to portray here, because what we want to be doing is implying, in a physical sense, we're implying the opposite, that the Wanderer, as they kind of hone in on Teal, as they're focusing more and more on her, the clarity of their intention, right, of their sinister nature, works in tandem with their reality, right? They are becoming themselves more focused on this state, on this conversation with this Teal. Maybe they don't get to that point of absolute certainty, but they're working towards this goal, right? They have an agenda, and this is what I mean by fleshing them out as a nuanced being. They have an agenda. They're trying to coerce Teal. And that's something that's not really coming across here. Physically, we want to kind of represent that by showing that the Wanderer is becoming more focused, right? They've stopped this twitchy kind of they've lost the tick. They've lost these twitchy ticks. They're speaking more clearly. They're no longer having these asides. They're no longer cutting Teal off or cutting the narration off. They're just, razzing her, ramping up the intensity of their sinister intention, while reminding her, right? The reason they're being sinister, the reason they're doing all of this is to remind Teal, the shit you're going through right now is helpless. And if you just take my hand, Miss Evergarden, I can make it all better. I can make all of this go away as long as you let me. Right? That's what they're building towards. That is the coercion. And as they're leading towards this, they should physically become clearer as their intention becomes clearer. We want to suggest that the Wanderers engage because they see an opportunity here, because they're letting themselves, through their efforts, know that, like, oh yeah, I think this Teal could be the one, right? Why not go for it? And they do, right? I don't want to get to them. I don't want them to get to the point where they are crystal clear, where they are super focused, where they are right there with Teal, so to speak. They should still have this dissonant voice, this shifting shape, this untouchable quality to them. Like, even when the two meet, right? Because we get to this point where Teal does take the Wanderer's hand. And we should, even in that scene, describe this hand, the Wanderer's hand, as kind of like twitching, as being static, in the sense of like not fitting the frame, right? The projection of which they are is not stable in one space at one time. They've got this, almost almost ghostly quality. There's almost a translucence to them at any one point, like as if what they're built of is multiple layers at like 10% opacity. And sure, where that all overlaps, where those 100 layers overlap, there is a form that teal can perceive, but all around it where it's not quite lining up, there's all of these, fading feathered edges. I don't know if that graphic design analogy really works for everyone, but hopefully that kind of makes sense. Um, as they're becoming more sinister, as they are working their way towards their intention, their speech should reflect this diabolical intent, as if they're speaking more deliberately, as if what they're trying to bring up to Teal, what they're teasing her about, are deliberate, careful, pointed attacks on her person. And via that, right, along that route, they're speaking a little more um, sinisterly. They're razzing Teal, right? They're bullying her at this point. It's no longer playful teasing. It's no longer fun. They're just kind of being a jerk at this point, and they can get away with it. They have this energy of like manic, impish devilry that they're really bringing to the table here, and we need to make that super clear as they're offering this sort of pact towards Teal. It becomes really apparent that at this moment they are not a benevolent being. They are not just a neutral. They're kind of being an active participant in unsavory behavior, and that's fine, and we kind of love them for it. But that's because we don't ultimately see the results of what was supposed to transpire, what could have transpired, I ought to say. Um, but that should definitely be their intention here. They're kind of being evil. They're it's not evil, it's not take over the world, it's not do awful things, but they are forcing their own agenda on Teal. They seem to be keen on having Teal do this thing because it propels their wants and desires before Teal's. This whole scene with the exchange with the pact needs to be painted in a more sinister air. We need to describe as if the world is being smothered, surrounded by this wicked aura. And like throughout this all, we don't talk about how Teal's feeling. We don't mention her hysteria at all. This scene just falls by the wayside. It just is a beat because we want to get to the next section. But going forward in draft two, this needs to be a bit of a high point, right? This needs to be a bit of a climax in the chapter that Teal reaches this zenith of of uncertainty, both in the Wanderer and her reality and herself, where she is willing to reach out and take this supposed shortcut, let's call it, that the Wanderer is offering. Um, and we need to paint the scene, right? And in painting the scene, we need to incorporate Teal, who right now just is like, oh, I'm tired. I guess I'll take your hand. We should be talking about how she's feeling, about how her lethargy plays into the scene, and how her antics, right? Her mental state right now is definitely not the most stable, and that should be reflected in this scene. She's not really sure, right? That's part of maybe why she's taking the Wanderer's hand here, is because she's not sure if any of this is even reality. Maybe she doesn't care, and maybe none of this has ever mattered. Um, she can be scared. She should be shoving aside her fear to clasp at something she thinks is maybe a tenable option at this present moment. But she's unsure if this is real, if this is maybe just another hallucination, and if it isn't, if it is, who like do I don't care. None of this has ever really mattered to begin with, has it? Just these are things that Teal should be thinking, but she's not right now. She just takes the Wanderer's hand and has a bad time, and they just keep talking afterwards, and that's kind of stupid. Um, Along those lines, in building the scene, there is this, like I say, there's this very small section, right? There's this very small paragraph where we talk about what Teal sees, what they witness, what they experience when they take the Wanderer's hand. And I don't think that does the job nearly enough. We really drop the ball when it comes to what Teal is experiencing in this moment. This I don't even know how you want to describe it. This bang, this current of energy coursing through her, this moment of unrelenting information overload. She is just a conduit, right? She is not even really there. She is just like all of these things, these experiences, these senses are flowing through her. Um, and we don't really even get into that, right? We don't talk about what of her senses are incorporated, what she's seeing, what she's hearing, what she's feeling, what she's tasting, right? What she's smelling. None of this really comes up, and it's such a, especially if we're building on this idea of incorporating her senses into basically every moment throughout the narrative, for this of all moments to be so haphazard. What gives? What the heck's going on? I thought I had to sneeze. So I muted, and I think my sneezes got stage fright. So pardon me for going quiet for half a second there. I thought I could squeeze out a sneeze real quick, but it turns out that's not how sneezes work. Um, I have this idea here, and still along the lines of this, this bombardment moment, this instance of overload for Teal, that this segment should end with a flash of the Swain, where Teal, for the briefest of moments, can actually see their face, right? We get this one little hint, this one little drop for Teal, where throughout this whole experience, there was one thing. There was one thing she could take away from it. And that one thing is probably the worst thing, right? Because it offers zero closure and it just makes her feel worse. I know I'm being evil to my own character, but that is my job. And that's a good idea, right? That's a great idea. I'll probably incorporate that into draft 2, just to have Teal hate her life a little bit more come the end of everything. What? Did any of that word come out properly? By the end of everything. Jesus. You can tell it's late in the day because normally at 3 p.m. I can kind of speak. I can maybe get some words out. I'm dragging my body along here, folks. Yeah, Teal is in a constant state of what the hell is happening. Very aptly put, Robin. Thank you for your input. Um, yeah, just something we could add to this scene to hammer home how awful it is for Teal. Um, and along the same lines, afterwards, when she's kind of recovering, it's pretty tepid. She kind of just like flops on the ground and has a bad time, and then kind of grumbles at the Wanderer, and that's so lame. That's so boring. She should be, I don't know if she will come to the point of actually puking, because she can't. She really hasn't ingested anything. There's nothing in her for her to puke, but she should be retching. She should be in this state of nausea, of just complete paralysis, that, almost as if she just had a seizure or something. Um, we don't talk about all how she's feeling. What's going through her mind right now? What's going through her body? How does it all feel? How does it all feel in conjunction with her exhaustion? Right? What is the point at which she exists right now? She's having a bad time, right? She's clearly existing in bad time zone right now. But this is obviously way worse than just being tired. This is like a fit, right? This is a physical, painful experience, almost like she's being electrocuted. And she just comes out of it being like, ugh, Wanderer got fists, right? And that's silly. That's very silly. This is like almost, a life or death experience here. And she just kind of walks it off. Um, this should be a really important moment. This should be such a a catalyst for Teal for the rest of the chapter and the rest of the book too. That Teal at this moment feels so insignificant, not only compared to the Wanderer, but reaching out and having this flash, having this overload reminds her and almost brands her as like, she knows, right, from this point on, she knows that she is such a tiny mote, less than a mote, less than, you know, not less than nothing, but getting darn close to it. She is very small and very insignificant in the grand scheme of everything. And it's because of this interaction that she gets up. And from this point on, like, we just don't talk about it at all. But from this point on, Teal views the Wanderer in a completely different light. That's why the back half of this chapter is so weird, because Teal is like barely hanging on to reality, but she just kind of had what she was barely hanging on to shattered, and all that's left in her hand is grains of sand. And she just looks at those and go, "Oh, that's not a lot. That's not, I don't got a lot going for me, do I?" No, girl, you don't. You don't. You know who you're talking to? You don't actually figure it out, but they're kind of crazy. They're kind of little nuts. And we don't play this up at all. Really wasted opportunity. So that's all that, right? They move on from that and they keep the conversation going into like a different direction. Um, okay, maybe not, right? Maybe I'm getting too far ahead. I just read my note. We should incorporate this idea that um, she kind of has this out of body experience, right? She comes to from this exposure to the Wanderer, and she's not all there until later on. She feels at this time that she is observing and present all at once. And if we're gonna keep this idea, which maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't, I don't know. I'm just the author. What do I know? We should incorporate this idea that there's a disconnected consciousness, that it's maybe not a momentary out of body experience, that Teal is much like her dream, present and observing all in the same moment. um, we should then move into this concept that Teal struggles to physically place herself in the present space, that both her observing self and her present self are disjointed, that they aren't connected. And Teal should have this moment of like, oh, this is kind of freaking me out. I should be in my body. Why am I not in my body? Why am I over here? Why can I see me? Why am I, existing in like a second person um, state, right? She should have this moment of observing, of living, of acting, and watching, of both speaking and listening. She is there as an active participant, but she witnesses herself doing these actions. And it's, we can build on this idea by reusing a lot of what we talked about in chapter 31. And this is kind of just a throwback, just to build up this idea of Teal's disorientated state. And I think all in all, it'll build a stronger narrative. This is something that could definitely be left out. It's just kind of an idea I had, but if we're working with this, I think being able to reach back into the book and talk about those things that we were addressing earlier on would help strengthen this section overall. Like I said, Teal has this shift in her perception of the Wanderer, and it, like I said, she really does just get back up. She gets knocked down, she gets up again, and the Wanderer ain't gonna keep her down. But she really does just change her tune all of a sudden, and that's pretty silly. I don't know why she just goes 180s on her uh, antagonistic view of the Wanderer. They were just very clearly trying to get you to do something terrible, and you did do it, but you like backed out of it, right? The drug dealer was trying to get you hooked on meth, and you reached for it, and you said, "Yeah, man, I'll do some." But then at the last minute, you were like, "No, drugs are bad," right? Like one of those old, like "Don't do drugs" commercials or something from Mothers Against Drunk Driving or whatever, from the government of Canada or whatever. You ever seen those old ads? Those old like '90s ads? They're all over YouTube. You can check them out if you want. But something like that, right? Teal really just has this moment of like, "Oh, you're the bad guy, man. I don't want to talk to you." But and then she goes, "Oh, well, I guess you're not so bad." There should definitely still be this air of like, "Oh, I still think you're evil. I still think you're bad, but I have just been enlightened to something beyond my mortal perception, and I'm willing to maybe just stand here and let you be evil because you're creepy, and I am, you know, I am mired by a relentless curiosity. Um, it isn't this idea that the wanderer has calmed, right? It's That's kind of how it's framed now, but it's this idea that Teal's willing to parlay with them, right? She's come out of the other side of this experience feeling different. Um, and another aspect of that is not that the Wanderer is calmed, but that they are, after this instance, a little more focused on Teal. That they are, they played a trick on her, and that was pretty interesting. But then what really was interesting is how Teal pulled away from it. Teal, in that moment, disagreed. She changed her mind, and that's what really piques the Wanderer's interest here. Is that, oh, wait a minute, this one's a little funny. This one's a little different. I didn't trick them outright, huh? But they didn't just storm on by. She kind of took a weird middle route that is maybe a little more rare. It kind of catches them off guard. Of course, it doesn't catch them off guard, but they are becoming more focused on this Teal for whatever reason. Um, Teal has this thought that the conversation is just premeditated, that what they're talking about has already, like, it's fate, right? I think that's what she ends up saying. She ends up suggesting, oh, this has all been fated to happen. And the notion comes out of nowhere, and that's kind of silly. I don't overall dislike the idea that Teal has this notion that this conversation, that all that she's been doing, that all she's been leading up to, or that she has been led up to, are just premeditated, that it's fated to happen. But if this is something that we're going to keep, this idea that Teal thinks, oh, okay, well, this must be fate, this is something we need to build up to. Similarly to how she comes to the conclusion that the Wanderer must be a devil of some sort, she should come to the conclusion that this must be fated, right? If what you're saying is true, if all that what you're saying is true, then this must be fate. This must be like determined by the whims of that which came before. Um, and that's just something we need to suggest a few times beforehand, right? We need to build a bridge between now and then if we decide to keep this idea. Moreover, though, we need to connect this segment of Teal failing, right? Because that's essentially what she's done. She's failed to accept the Wanderer's offering. Um, to this next segment where the Wanderer is explaining their and overall existence in general. We need to connect those two ideas way more fluidly. Right now, they're both very like, right? It's a book. They really do just occupy their own pages, but it should be something that is sewn together, something that transitions nicely from one idea to the next. Right now, it's very PowerPoint, very like, and here's the next issue, and here's the next thing we're going to talk about, which is dumb and bad and not good writing. They're having a conversation, and conversations flow. There is a fluidity to ideas. I don't actually have like a great idea for how to connect them, but I think this idea of talking about fate is pretty integral. I think the main issue right now is that none of this is introduced very well. None of this concept, none of the, like, there's nothing to base the fluidity off of is the main issue right now. As it stands, there's nothing to swing from. The conversation just goes from one beat to another because there's nothing for it to swing between, because we've done none of the setup. And so I think of a good way of doing that is to maybe tie in this whole idea of fate and whatnot. Um, I'm gonna ignore Robin because I gotta keep talking. Um, so harkening back to this split consciousness thing, this is just like an idea of an idea. If this is something we pursue, this is just something tasty. This is just something I really want, right? I want way more instances of the Wanderer just being like such a terror to the narrative. I want the Wanderer to make Bugs Bunny look sane, to make Bugs just, whatever, to make what was his name, Mel whatever, the big director from Warner Brothers who did basically all the best Looney Tunes episodes. I want the Wanderer to make that guy look like they're in kindergarten, right? I want the Wanderer to do dumb shit like while Teal's having an out of body experience, I want the Wanderer to turn to the observing Teal, right? To just kind of like have these little moments where this out of body Teal is maybe screaming, maybe just like growing frustrated with themselves. Like, why are you talking to him like that? Why are you talking to this little gremlin? Stop talking to them. Just leave. Just go on. Right? Having these moments that one might have when watching a horror movie. Right? I don't know. Maybe you don't watch horror, but if you do watch horror, there's a trademark moment. There's a hallmark moment where you're watching the horror movie and you go, "Oh no, character, stop being stupid," but the stupid thing has to happen, right? But still, we can have out of body Teal be saying these things. And in that moment, God, wouldn't it be great if the Wanderer just turned to out of body Teal and they were like, "Hey, could you maybe stop talking right now? I'm trying to have a conversation." I have no idea how I would write that in a way that makes any sense, that is readable and enjoyable, and, you know, it ties into the narrative. But you know, I don't know if I need to be. I don't know if I have to inject cleverness into this. I think the Wanderer can just pull stuff like this, where they can talk to the reader, where they can just speak through Teal, where they can just shatter the fourth wall and even subvert the fifth and be like, "Hey, anyways, are you like, wow, you're still reading this book? That's crazy. I didn't think anybody would make it this far," right? Little tinges like that, where the Wanderer is just so off the cuff, so off the script that they come off as this deranged menace to both Teal, the book, and the reader. That's an idea I had. I don't know if it'll make it in. I think it's really funny, but we'll have to see. We'll keep putting on. We'll keep pressing on for now. Um, we get into some explanations. We get into some weird, like we're tiptoeing around the main crux here, right? We get into it in a little bit, and I don't even think we're gonna have time in this episode to really talk about the main metaphysical philosophy that the chapter gets into. But the Wanderer starts to tiptoe around the issue, and they're really not using their rhymes, they're not using their rhythm, they've lost their antics, and that's really depressing. They kind of just turn into a professor here, a laughing, cackling professor, and it's off character, right? This is one of the instances where I was reading and I was like, "Oh, who wrote this section? Who came in to ghostwrite here?" um they're talking about how Teal exists in a present moment, and they're using the motion of Teal nodding as an example. And honestly, I think all of this is probably going to get rewritten. I don't think they're going to use this nodding as an example, but a lot of this is muddled. A lot of this needs to be cleaned up. A lot of this needs to reflect the Wanderer as a character as we start to get into their weird philosophy, that there is more to what they're presenting, right? There is more to them. There is more to the world. There is more to the universe than meets the eye. Um, and that's something we need to be building up here while we're maintaining a holistic presentation of the Wanderer. Um, Throughout this all, right, the Wanderer's kind of giving this sermon. They are kind of teaching Teal. They're showing her things. And I think in this moment, harkening back to that idea I had where the Wanderer just turns to camera two and like tells out of body Teal to STFU. I think we can totally have scenes like this where they're teaching Teal and they just go full animaniacs, right? I think the Wanderer can honestly breach the ground of cartoon character and just become this wacky, unknowable creature that exists within the text. As if they like manifest objects. They just maybe put on a costume, right? Maybe they do a funny voice. Anything to get the point across that they are absolutely not playing by the book's rules. The book has had rules the whole time, and then you get to the Wanderer, and the Wanderer goes, actually, I don't want to. I have to for the sake of being here in the story, but I'm going to mess around while I'm here. I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to goof up. I'm going to have my text be right aligned because I just don't want to be on the left. There isn't a hint of arrogant to it, but, dumb stuff like that. So I think we can have little cartoonish things like that. Maybe while they're explaining this whole idea, they really get into the nitty gritty of the idea of time existing in different sort of trees and branches. I think while they do that, they can just conjure like a pull down map or something, or like a whiteboard, and they can just have little graphics ready to gesture to and to point to and to help Teal learn, like, oh no, see, it's a tree, right? Time is just a tree. And they can sort of use these infographics that they spawn and conjure all willy nilly. Um, you can also see, if you're like, pardon me for the people who are just listening, but if you actually look at my notes throughout here, you can see how I get pretty deranged. My notes start slipping apart the further they go, just because I had to deal with the insanity of like trying to pick apart this crazed individual. And I'm not going to lie with y'all, I wrote most of chapter 35 in a pretty deranged state myself. The Wanderer kind of just came out of me, and I don't know, maybe we're related. We've got kind of a similar uh, uh, shapelessness, but one could argue that the Wanderer exists within us all, and about us all, and among us all. Oh no, I said it. Among us. Anyways, getting back on track. Another missed opportunity for the soundboard. Um, yeah, the Wanderer should be way more cartoonish, and I these notes are kind of just me saying we shouldn't be afraid to just have the Wanderer be really weird, to be really zany. I think it builds their character and it makes them more fun, and it makes reading this kind of dry metaphysical philosophy a little more digestible. If the Wanderer throughout here is kind of just being silly. Um, and these are just examples, right? I'm not going to go through them all. These are just kind of examples. We can have the Wanderer do all of these crazy things, and then Teal maybe just blinks a few times, or maybe she rubs her eyes, and then everything's back to normal. We should get the impression that Teal is always uncertain. She is never sure if the Wanderer is real, if she's still in reality, or if her hallucinations have taken over, or if she's maybe just been dreaming this whole time. We should never, ever get any clarity on what's going on here until maybe later on. For now, though, pressing on, we've just got a few pages left. A lot of the later on stuff I can summarize pretty easy. I think we're just skipping a lot of it, actually. Um, Let me see. Where were we? Where were we? Right there. Um, so we get through this conversation, right? And things are kind of just piled up on TL again and again. And we should make it really apparent that she's struggling to converse, both because of her anxiety and her exhaustion. Um, and that's just the point. We need to make it more clear that Teal is really struggling to both stay in the conversation physically, but also mentally and verbally, that she should reflect these qualities. Um, there should also be a lot of instances where Teal is trying to make eye contact with the Wanderer, but she just can't, both because she's pretty freaked out, also because she's tired, but mostly because she just can't stand, like, there's a revulsion that comes about her when she tries to make eye contact with the Wanderer. The depth of their eyes, the eyes of their mask, is just like too powerful, too hideous in a sense for Teal to withstand. Um, and apparently that's going to be like a good contrast and some fun foreshadowing for later, but I something has centered my notes here, so sorry about that, folks. I guess I'll have to talk about that some other time. Um, there are some really nice hints throughout here, and I'm just going to kind of scroll through through the book part here haphazardly because we're not really talking about anything in particular right now. But there are a lot of really nice hints that the Wanderer gives to Teal, that she's a little strange, that she's kind of funny, that maybe she doesn't add up very well compared to the rest of the Teals. Um, but I don't know if there's a way to really maintain this to make it more apparent while keeping it subtle. And I don't even think I do a really great job of making it subtle as it is. I like that it's there. I like that idea, but it's hard to communicate without just dropping a big spoiler or making it too obvious, right? We kind of got to play this balancing game here. The Wanderer knows what's awaiting Teal. They know what's coming up in the book, but even they don't know, right? Even they only know up until a certain point. They only know up until the finale. And it's at that point that they're pretty certain about things. Um, we need to build this idea that the Wanderer is certain, right? That they know what's going to happen to Teal because they maybe know pretty much everything. Um, so that when it happens later on down the line that they were not entirely right, that they have this sense of shock and surprise and probably like some glee, some giddiness. They're elated that they were wrong, or rather that they weren't entirely right about the outcome of what happens to Deal. Um, so we can kind of just incorporate this into what we're doing here. That we need to hint that the Wanderer isn't letting on, like they know more than they're letting on, rather, and that they're a little aware that what's about to happen to Teal is unavoidable, and but they sense something, right? They sense something about Teal. They sense she's kind of strange, right? And that's why they're interested in her. That's why after they take her hand, like we were saying, she takes the hand, but she relents. She changes her mind. That the Wanderer's starting to pick up this vibe, like, oh, you're kind of weird. This is one of the branches that is a little more fun. You like this third dimensional being is a little more interesting than some of the other ones. So I'm going to focus in on this one for the time being. Um, and just we can build that, right? We can push that snowball down the hill. It'll kind of roll itself up as it goes. Um, there's this hint that Teal starts talking like the Wanderer, and I don't think it comes up too apparent right now, but it should be something we build going forward. Um, we're trying to establish this idea that Teal and the Wanderer are connected by, the red thread of fate, so to speak. And that's such a lovely way to do it, to have Teal inadvertently start talking like the Wanderer. And it's kind of just a slip up here, but it should be a slip up that keeps happening going forward until later on in the book when Teal is just kind of doing it. Teal is just kind of like, it just sprouts from her. It'll just spring out from her where she's just like, oh, yeah, no, I'm just talking. And then here's a rhyme. And she always kind of takes a second to pause and be like, oh, that was weird, until she doesn't, until she just stops doing that because she's just so intertwined with the idea of, I guess this is a part of me now. Like, I guess, like, my mind is always thinking about the little gremlin person, that she can't get that out of her, that her and the Wanderer are intertwined. And we're exemplifying this by having her speech reflect the Wanderer in some aspects. Um, yeah, just like I said, we want to keep this really vague at first, but going further on, we want it to be more of a thing until later on when it becomes a real thing. Those are just some notes for me just to take care of in my own time. Um, so the Wanderer starts talking about a lot of things. And most importantly, they start talking about the best way I can sum it up is that they explain the idea of the infinite dimension theory. more or less, right? The idea that there is infinity beyond infinity. And I'm not doing this justice by spitballing the baseline facts at like 9 at night when I'm pretty sleepy and I've just talked for 2 hours. But trust me when I say that what they end up talking about is pretty dense, and it has to do with quantum mechanics, and it has to do with quantum physics. Not so much quantum mechanics, more it's just quantum physics. And it's not exactly something that is airtight, but it's not exactly something that can be disproven, at least as of yet. And so they kind of just spin this yarn, and it's pretty crazy. But we need to have this stepping back from that. Um, an issue leading into this is that the Wanderer starts describing different dimensions, and Draft One Teal is pretty on board with it. She's helping, right? She's staying in the conversation up until a certain point. A draft two teal, I think, would be pretty helpless. I don't think even draft two teal would know what really like the infinity of space and time could be. She wouldn't really have a great grasp on like the third dimension as we know it scientifically. Um, I think in draft two, the Wanderer is going to have to coax Teal along, really have to lead her through their philosophy. Um, but like it's just going to have to be an aspect. Draft 2 Teal is a lot more clueless, needs a lot more help. And here, especially, she's going to have to be tutored and mentored throughout this. She might have little bubbles, right? She might have little bursts of like, oh yeah, that thing. Yeah, like the second dimension is just a line, right? And yeah, sure, she can have things like that. But the Wanderer is really going to have to explain things and build up their ideas from the ground up. Um, there's a funny bit here about the Wanderer describing different teals, how there was maybe, how there was a teal who was talking to them and how the Wanderer gave that teal a pie. And this is a very specific thing. This is probably one of the few things that's going to remain because I love it as a gag. Um, we should instantly, when the Wanderer is talking about how that teal got a pie, this teal should react with, well, wait a minute, why didn't I get a pie? It just becomes immediately envious. Um, just like, oh, well, why didn't I get a pie? I'm starving. And we should twist that into the idea that the Teal becomes self-aware, that she's like, wait a minute, you probably know what I want. You know all of the things that I want. And she just starts becoming like more and more spiteful. And just to the point where she's arguing. I don't know. It would be best to keep it in line with this notion of the pie, right? Kind of as a gag, like I said, kind of lighthearted, where Teal's getting irate and just like, but I want a pie. I'm starving. Why can't I be the Teal who gets a pie? Why is it the other Teal? And the Wanderer just has to say, well, it was the other Teal who got the pie, and you're not that Teal, are you? You're the one who didn't get a pie. You are the teal who never gets a pie, and that's just the teal you are. And teal just like it feels so um wounded by this, just so hurt. And there's a word for that. I've used it tons of times in the book, but it's escaping me right now. Like Achilles, indignant. She feels really indignant. She feels like she's being unjustifiably tormented in this moment. Like, oh, well, like all the other teals get a pie, but I don't. That's tealist. How dare you, Wanderer? You cruel, cruel being. Just an idea. I think it's a fun idea. Um, So, as the Wanderers talking about their stuff, we should build this idea that there's sort of like a storm growing, right? Like there's this energy growing to what they're talking about as they climb towards the zenith of the insanity that is their worldview, I guess. We can call it in gentle terms. Um, and we can manifest this. We can exemplify it. These are things we can show that the Wanderer is like uh, incorporating this idea that maybe part of their energy is just manifesting as a storm around them. Um, we're trying to show that as the Wanderer talks, right, the deeper this conversation goes, the more Teal has to reconcile with the idea that the Wanderer isn't just a hallucination. They are kind of making sense here, and they're kind of freaking her out, and that they are vastly more knowledgeable and in one way more powerful than Teal could ever really hope to understand. And it's, we're taking these slow steps as the Wanderer works their way through, like, to the top, to the peak of their mania, while they're explaining this ordeal to a third dimensional being, that Teal becomes more and more aware of what the Wanderer is, and this storm manifests. It grows in intensity as the Wanderer's energy does. Overall, pretty much this whole section is just like pretty clunky. Um, we've got this good base to work off of, but we don't work it, we don't make the most of it, which is just kind of sucky. But like I said, a lot of this is going to be rewritten. There's a side note here. There's a good illusion here that Teal considers briefly that the Wanderer's tree is kind of growing into her tree, the tree that is like her life, so to speak. That all the branches of her life, the possibilities of her life, and she makes this illusion that the Wanderer's tree is growing into hers, which is kind of great because we're exemplifying that she, at that point is what she's kind of buying into the idea that the Wanderer's talking about, but she still doesn't get it. She still doesn't quite understand what they are compared to her. She can't grapple with the magnitude, and she lacks the capacity of her present situation to know that no, it's not that the tree is intertwining. It's that the Wanderer is like beyond the trees. The Wanderer does not exist. They don't have their own tree. And if they did, it would be tough to explain. And I don't want to do that right now. So like, we just need to know here that Teal's lack of understanding here is very apt. She's trying to put it in ways that she can understand, but the ways she can understand don't do the Wanderer justice. And that's good. Yeah, we can use that as an idea that she is, because she thinks about it, right? She's kind of scared. She's like, this guy's kind of freaking me out. And she thinks about running. She thinks about getting away. And she thinks about it in ways that should corroborate this idea. That, okay, if I run away, maybe that'll put me on a branch that gets me away from this guy. Maybe that'll take me, like, if I run away now, if I stop talking to the Wanderer, if I just flee, if I just go find the bell tower on my own, like I should have just listened to the pilgrim. If I go do that now, maybe the branch that path will set me on will take me away from the tree, like take me away from the parts of the tree that involve this creep, right? That's kind of what she's thinking. Even though beyond that, the idea of like trying to get away from the Wanderer is pretty much impossible. They might not be there. They might not be present in a physical sense that Teal can perceive, but they are still there for all intents and purposes. As the Wanderer starts talking, we kind of lose things, and unfortunately, that's just like me being bad at writing. Um, as they start talking in more depth of the different dimensions, they kind of just fall off. And that's mostly because I fall off as an author. And I have this other document here. I don't want to open it on stream, otherwise I'd have to get into the whole mess of what they talk about, and I'm really trying to skirt around that issue because I don't have the time. It's already 9 o'clock, folks. I want to be in bed later. I want to have a nice sleep tonight. So we're just going to skip over the fact that the Wanderer talks about a whole bunch of crap. And trust me when I say I have ironed out a lot of the issues. There's a whole other document for it. There's a whole another like 17-page document where I hammer out the issues with the things that the Wanderer talks about, and I put them in context. I put them in context for like how the Wanderer is framing them, how they go about saying that to Teal. I give little examples. We're not going to get into that right now. Maybe that can be a video at the end, right? Maybe that'll be the 100 subscriber special. I'll talk about this BS. You can hear me talk about metaphysical quantum physics in a philosophical sense for like 3-4 hours, and I'll die probably by the end of it. I don't want to die, so I'm not doing that right now. Which is to say, this just needs cleaning up. This whole thing about the dimensions, it just needs cleaning up. Um, while the Wanderer is parsing this information to Teal, we keep mentioning that she's concerned, that she's kind of distraught, that what the Wanderer says is kind of blowing her mind. But she doesn't act the part at all. She doesn't act concerned. She doesn't act afraid. She doesn't have any tension to her. She's kind of just sitting there and listening. And I get we're kind of trying to show that she's so exhausted, she's so tired that she can't even emote, but I think we're leaving out so much. Even if she's tired, she can still emote. She would still have body language, right? And we're dropping so many pieces just kind of being lazy. We should be reinforcing her feelings with the appropriate expressions and reactions. We can mute some of them to reflect that she's tired, but uh, can't we use that? Can't we use that as a note, right? As a stepping stone? We can describe how she's kind of shrinking into herself, how she's becoming quiet, how she's no longer commenting on what the Wanderer has to say. She's not just an idle participant. She is becoming quiet and insular because the Wanderer is scaring the ever-loving shit out of her. Um, and most importantly, where did the heartbeats go? Where did the heartbeat go, folks? Well, they ain't been around for quite a while, and this, heck, that'd be a great spot for them. And they're just gone. I didn't. I just dropped them off. I dropped them off at daycare, and I forgot to pick them up. I'm a terrible parent. I left those heartbeats hanging. Anyway, they should come back, right? These should be moments where we're using the heartbeat. Um, yeah, I know, Robin. It's pretty terrible. I'm such a degenerate. Um, and likewise, I kind of just dropped the ball. The Wanderer is building to this manic zenith of energy, and man, they come to the finale and they're just kind of the narrative is just like whatever, man. Um, I love that they have this madness to them, but Teal, right? Teal's got no reaction. Teal does not even jump or cower or anything. She doesn't shiver with fear at this being of unrelenting power and ferocity and insanity in this moment. She doesn't do anything. What gives, girl? You're just standing there. Come on. And it's my fault, right? It's my fault. I made her stand there. But we can have her react. We can have her utter. We can have her say things or do things. Why don't we manifest madness and balance it against Teal's fear, right? We should be showing these two characters in opposition. Even if one of them is silent, one of them is dumbfounded and paralyzed by fear, that's still an opposition. She is not running, right? This is a big thing, and we don't talk about it at all. The fact that Teal is not leaving, Teal is just standing there and is trying to take this all in, even though she could leave, even though she probably should be leaving. We don't get into any of it, and it's such a missed opportunity to build Teal as a character and reflect that, right? We're using the Wanderer's actions here as a spark, and Teal just doesn't light up. Teal just isn't receptive to any of it, and it's such a missed opportunity to show the depth and complexity of her as an individual at this moment. Um, y'all read that part in the Bible, where Moses talks to a flaming bush? Or that was, whatever. He talks, he's just like, ah. And then it's like, no, don't be afraid, Moses. It's just me, God. And then Moses is like, okay. He kind of refuses God a few times, actually, if I remember correctly. But I don't want that, right? The Wanderer here is a flaming bush, and Teal should just be absolutely having a moment of like, this guy's kind of creeping me out. I thought you were just a funky little dude, but and then I thought you were a devil, but actually, I'm not even sure if calling you a devil is right anymore. Like, you are a thing that is beyond. I don't have a word for you. You're just freaking me out right now, right? We need to be building that kind of mentality with Teal. They have a little moment with a light, right? The Wanderer conjures this beautiful, captivating light, and it's kind of just lacking in spectacle. It's a really integral beat. It's a really important point, and like I can't stress how important this spectacle, this conjuring of this ball of light is for Teal, right? For the book, for the narrative, and for Teal. And we don't dwell on it. We don't give it what it's owed at all, and that's just really disappointing. Um, just going forward, that's all I can say. Make the scene more important, make it more impactful. I don't have a great way to do that, but just maybe linger here a little longer. That's the best advice I can give myself right now. Alternatively, or rather on a different note, we can suggest that here at this point the wanderer's form begins to shift again. You know, they're lapsing out of focus, and not here at the conjuring of light, but like here at the peak of their madness, that they are unable to keep their form holistic, that their physical appearance is starting to scatter, is starting to dissipate, that they're, you know, almost breaching containment, so to speak. Um, they're lapsing out of focus because they're going on this tirade, because they're, you know, they're trying to contain this energy, this excitement, this passion they have for their philosophy, for, you know, and I hate to call it a philosophy because it's not really philosophy. It's just like how the world works. If you buy into the infinite universe theory, which like I low key do, but you don't have to, I guess, because it is kind of mad. But the Wanderer, who encapsulates this idea, is not, it's not an idea for them, right? It just is. And they just are. And the idea isn't an idea, it's just them, right? And they're trying to get this across to a three-dimensional being. And like, on top of probably being pretty frustrated, they're really into this, right? This is them. This is everything. This is all of everything forever and all of nothing never. And we don't really get into how that would make them feel, how they would exemplify that, right? We were talking about them being a being that is maybe in between, right? They're a transient being, physically, that is. And we can bring that up again here to show that amid this height of energy, they're really struggling to keep it together. They and Teal at this moment are struggling to keep it together. And we can show that in different ways for different reasons. Let me take another quick sip here. I think we can barrel through the rest of this pretty quickly. Let's try our best. Let's do a speed round. We've been doing this for a couple hours. Let's try to do this in the next 30 minutes. Because if we do this in 30 minutes, then I can go have a snack. And if not, then I probably just have to go to bed hungry. And that's really sad. Folks, I can't tell you how badly I don't want to go to bed hungry. Okay? I love eating. Okay? I don't think y'all get it. Let me say that again. I love eating. I love food. I love putting things into my face. I'll let you parse that last sentence. Um, so, okay, we get back to the light. We get back to the little wad of light, which is really important. And we have a beat here where Teal recalls some memories while she's glimpsing at the light. That's good. That's fine. They should be, how do I want to say this? The light, it should be described in a way that the light is manifesting memories within her, right? Not so much that the memories are sudden recollections. We do this kind of weird thing, and this is pretty hyper specific, so like unless I bring up the exact lines, it is a little wishy-washy, so I apologize for that. But this moment when Teal sees the light, right? She sees this wad of light, this spectacle, this brilliance, this unknowable spectrum of light that's washing over her. It should be as if the memories are kind of coming out of that light and not as if she's just suddenly remembering things, right? These are little things that are kind of washing over her. She has this moment where she, and this kind of incorporates what I'm trying to get across with this, that she has this moment of reflection here, that she thinks, okay, I feel as though I'm part of the light. I feel as though this is part of me and I'm part of this. But she also stops to worry about, if I am part of it, if I do join this light, if I do relent myself, if I do give in to the light and let it wash over me and let it become part of me and let myself be part of it, am I not then sullying it somehow? But we don't really get into the idea of that she would likely extrapolate that, like, she is part of it, right? She is part of it. It is part of her. And for her to even think, oh, I'm going to ruin it, is a little silly because she is already part of it, right? Ruin it or not, she's there. Um, so we just need to kind of incorporate a little more nuance and a little more, um, and just be a little more careful regarding the wad of light and how it affects Teal and what Teal thinks about when it is there. Um, we mentioned that Teal is having a really hard time coming to terms with what the Wanderer is describing, but like I said, her actions don't support this notion. Um, the fact that we give the Wanderer a solid hunk of the book to just info dump is great for exposition, but it's terrible conversation. Like I said, I know Teal's tired. I know she's not super receptive, but she, even in this state, should be able to afford a back and forth. Her decorum, her charisma are all just drained. She's not going to be putting in the effort she normally would, but she is engaged, right? This is a situation in which she is engaged because at the beginning she's been enticed into a situation that she thought was maybe beneficial, that was maybe a shortcut, and then afterwards she's so intrigued by this strange little creature, by this divine being beyond comprehension, that she's both too afraid to leave and too intoxicated by their presence to leave. Right? She's just like completely paralyzed by an internal dilemma. And she doesn't act, she doesn't do anything, she doesn't reflect any of these notions, she doesn't even really think about any of this. And come on, this is such a big moment for both characters that just, why isn't she doing anything? Come on, girl. I know you're tired. Wake up. Wake up. Let's go. Wake up. Um and this is kind of me just ragging on myself even throughout my notes here. Like, wouldn't it be better to include kind of a one-sided conversation to build the sense that she's exhausted? Wouldn't it be better to, rather than just omit her, rather than just have Teal be nonplussed at the side, wouldn't it be better to show that she's exhausted by having her try and fail to maintain conversation? Wouldn't it be more evocative and more uh, um, exemplary of a conversation? I'm sure we've all had conversations like that where you're just talking to somebody who's clearly tired and they're just sitting there and responding, yeah, oh, haha, yeah, uh-huh, right? They're just doing the bare minimum to listen. Why don't we show that that's what Teal's doing? Wouldn't that wouldn't that push her more as a character than just omitting her? I think it would. I think it probably would. She is trying to converse, and that's such a big thing. She is part of this conversation, but she's just so low energy that it's not coming across very well. Um, she should be struggling. She wants to be part of this conversation. She's just naturally so inclined via curiosity that she's intrigued, right? She is intrigued on a base level, but she just can't exemplify that. She can't burn the energy to get to a point where she can like pick the wanderer's brain. But she still should be there, and we should exemplify this by having her be present and by revealing to the reader, you know, Teal nodded. Teal said, "Oh, because it's all that she could muster." Right? Little things like that we can show to the reader that she is engaged. Yes, she is really trying her best. She is not her former self, and she is just so flippin' tired. But regardless, despite it all, she's still doing it. She is still here. She is always present, even though maybe she doesn't want to be. Teal has a moment where she remembers that the Wanderer can read her thoughts, and that's great. She's learning about the Wanderer. The Wanderer just suddenly shifts conversation here. That's not good. I absolutely have a moment where I go, oh, I need them to do the plot, and then they do the plot. And that's just stupid, right? If we're going to have a segue here, let's build it. Let's not just flip a switch and change the topics. Um, we just have some really bad conversational whiplash. Um, what they end up talking about isn't wrong, but how they get there is just stupid and doesn't make sense. Which is to say, there isn't a way they get there. They just teleport, right? They teleport behind you. Nothing personnel, kid. It doesn't make sense. We need to get to that point, not just arrive at it. Um, we are taking like this. This is a really important point, right? The Wanderers, given their spiel, they're sort of come back down. They're a little more focused on Teal, and we're having a bit more of an emotional pull here. We're having a bit more of an emotional moment where the Wanderer is having this shift as of a character, right? They're like developing. We're showing this different side of the Wanderer, but how we get there is way too abrupt. We want to kind of linger here and enjoy the transition. Um, they're playing some music so we can describe the song, how it makes Teal feel, what Teal is thinking about in these moments, what she thinks that the Wanderer is thinking, and kind of just digesting this idea that the Wanderer just dropped on her, that there is an all of everything and a none of nothing, that there is simultaneously and somehow impossibly both everything everywhere all at once and nothing nowhere never. And that's great. That's awesome. I love that they have this little moment, but like Teal doesn't take the time to reconcile with it. We don't shift the sentiment, the tone of the story here. It does really just kind of like get switched like a knob, clicking from crazed to now we have to be kind of dour, right? Click. There it is. We're in the next mode. Um, and having that transition there would serve the narrative better. It's better to read. It's better to carry the reader between these two facets. Teal has some empathy here. It doesn't come out of nowhere, but it isn't directed very well. It isn't honed very well. We need to build this idea, much like we need to transition between the tone that we were just talking about. We need to build this idea that despite everything she was just experiencing with the Wanderer and all of the off putting, evil, sinister vibes they're giving, Teal still can't shake this feeling that somewhere deep down, somewhere, somehow, the Wanderer shares something akin to homesickness. And that at this point, and this is really what we've been building to this moment for a long while, talking about Teal's empathy towards others. We mentioned how she's conjured this strange empathy towards Lacrimosa, who is a bug, but she also has the capacity to build empathy towards this being who is pretty like hard to pin down, is indescribable, clearly exists beyond her in some capacity, and she like knows that by the end of this conversation, but she still has this feeling, this strange stone in her gut that the Wanderer might be lonely, that there might be kind of this bridge between them. And this should be one of the first instances where Teal musters the courage to look the Wanderer in the eyes, that she's developing this empathy, that she's trying to connect with him, that she is taken aback by the fact that something so beyond her could also exist in a similar state to her. She could also express the same emotions as, kind of this lowly being that she has come to see herself in the Wanderer's eyes. Um, this is just a little nitpick. There's a mention of like sobbing here, and that's kind of weird. Um, I don't necessarily hate the idea of there being kind of like a moroseness to some of the delivery throughout this section, but it's just really weirdly presented. Who's sobbing here? What's going on, right? Um, Instead, maybe it would be better to allude to previous sections, such as the singing of the mountains. Um, Teal feels like she hears the Wanderer sobbing somewhat as they're playing music, but she can't quite put her finger on it. She's like, "Oh, it didn't sound like crying, but I don't really get it." But I think describing it as sobbing is too strong. It's too forward. Describing it as something more ethereal would be, would inject more mystique as well as um better equipping the wanderer's emotions, that they are kind of hard to understand. But despite all of that, Teal is getting something out of that. She is getting sort of this forlorn quality that makes her think about the mountains, when she was really at her lowest point just a few minutes ago. Yes, Robin, I know you were sobbing because you decided to stay up this late. I told you you didn't have to moderate. I told you you could just go to bed. But no, no, Robin had to stay up the whole time. Yeah, well, now we're both suffering. Congratulations. Um, what's this point even saying? So essentially, the two kind of have this heart to heart, right? The two kind of share this heart to heart where, um, despite Teal's present state, despite her fatigue, she has a moment of clarity. And that's good, right? This is what we want Teal to have. She has this moment where she kind of has an epiphany, and she is just surrounded, smothered by empathy for the Wanderer. And that's fine and dandy, but we don't really build on the idea at all. Um, we don't really express that she is expressing empathy, that she is coming to this point of like, oh, I think I get it. I think, like, I don't get anything you just told me, but some part of me does. And I think I get you because you're maybe lonely, and I'm pretty darn lonely right now, too. Despite the vastness that exists between us, despite how you are clearly so much more than I am, I think maybe I see a little bit of myself in you, and that's kind of crazy to me, right? But we don't describe any of this. We just, like, you can see here, right? They have this little heart to heart, and then like the chapter ends. The chapter ends right here. Bip bip bip. This is where the Wanderer kind of like finishes off their explaining, and then there's a page, and then there's like another page, and then the chapter ends. And throughout all of this, we don't dive into how Teal's feeling, how she's trying to express herself, and that's a lot of wasted potential. We we really need to have this quiet, tender moment where both of the parties come to this place of like resignation and understanding. Um, on one side, right? On one side, we have Teal developing this empathy of feeling this understanding, coming to like the vaguest, the outermost reach of understanding for the Wanderer, but still trying to cross that vastness and be kind and be, extend grace towards them. While on the other side, we have the Wanderer, who by this point we know that they know pretty much everything that's about to transpire, right? And maybe this isn't something that comes up on a first reading, but definitely second reading, definitely long time, anybody who's read draft one should be coming through this passage and knowing like, oh, the Wanderer still goes through this whole conversation. The Wanderer still does all of these things and has this sweet moment with Teal and then sends her off at the end, even though they know, exactly up to the point in which it all comes crumbling down, they know what's about to happen to Teal, and there's nothing they can do about it because this isn't that Teal. This isn't that timeline. And if they do a thing about it, well, hey, guess what? That's a different Teal, and that's a different timeline, and that's a different Wanderer. It's all out of their hands, and it's all in their hands, and it all is their hands, and it's all there, always. unless it isn't. And that sucks, right? We don't like, I don't think we should be so super overt about that, but we should be pretty overt that like Teal at this time is kind of developing these weird emotions for a being that is quite likely beyond her complete comprehension. Um, and just one final note, we can have Teal say some last sweet lines and have her speech reflect some of the rules that the Wanderer was using, right? And in doing so, we can exemplify visually through the font that, through the text, that Teal has taken something away. Not only is she doing the silly rhyming thing, she's speaking to the Wanderer. She's trying to cross this bridge or build this bridge between the two of them, despite the astronomical distance between the two beings, that she's taking care to express herself in a way that is similar to the Wanderer because she has taken something away from them, right? She has understood to some degree what they were preaching. And we can show that by doing little things like that, by having her use the same rules that the Wanderer speaks with. So yeah, some of this is a little hard to describe. Teal towards the end here kind of part of her empathy is suggesting that the Wanderer might want to come with her. She suggests, well, like, you could come with me. Don't you want to? If we're both kind of lonely, wouldn't it be nice to have somebody with you? Like, we don't have to talk or anything. We can kind of just go together. And the Wanderer sort of flips us on Teal by saying, like, this isn't that time. I'm not that Wanderer. I'm not the one who goes with you. There is another one. There is another Wanderer. There is another Teal, but that's not this one. And so we kind of exemplify this by, you know, you can see at the top of this page, right? The top of the page here, Teal says it could be though. We're trying to show that she's starting to grasp at these rules, at the idea that there are these infinite possibilities stretching out before her. And that's really like a nice subtle way of suggesting, yes, she is learning. She is kind of coming to a point in which she understands the Wanderer and the world and the universe at large. However, there's just like some ham-fisted remarks through here, and it really just ruins a lot of the empathy we've been trying to build. I think if we better intertwine this sentiment among this little like pre-departure here where Teal's extending this olive branch, I think it'll be much stronger, but also leave this really bittersweet taste in the mouth of readers as they come through this, right? They'll be seeing that Teal is, despite it all, really trying to be kind and pleasant, and she's really trying to overcome this barrier existing between the two, but the Wanderer is kind of stuck in a position where they go, if I do a thing, if I go off the rails here, then what transpires won't be what transpires. It will be a different branch. And if it's a different branch, then you won't be this Teal. And if you're not this Teal, then you're a different Teal and I'm a different Wanderer. And that's just how it's going to go. I'm the Wanderer who stays here right now and does this thing. And that's what's going to happen. And Teal just has to like quietly resign to that. And in getting to that, we have this note where Teal is really welling up with emotion, but it doesn't read very well. And like, I love that she is. I love that she's getting really emotional here, but why? And from where? We don't talk about where these emotions are coming from or what Teal is feeling or how they develop. Is it the fact that she is projecting empathy, that she gets the feeling that the Wanderer is lonely too? Is it that she thinks they're homesick? Does she understand that the Wanderer kind of knows her holistically in this moment and many others? What is she drawing from? Why is she welling up with emotion here? Is she frustrated? Does she feel helpless? Is she just tired? Is she, maybe developing feelings for the Wanderer? Is she conflicted because she's developing feelings, these strange lovey dovey feelings for an entity that exists in a realm beyond her comprehension? None of that's brought up. None of that's talked about here. Why is she having these emotions? There's even this line here. Why do I feel so poorly about this outcome? Teal doesn't reflect at all. And maybe we can even get into that. Maybe we can use this as one last instance of Teal failing to reflect, Teal failing to stop and think about why she's feeling the way she is. But regardless, man, we don't do either thing. We don't take either route. We just have Teal like, oh, she's emotional. Frickin', what a dweeb. Emotion? Those are for dweebs. And then we move on with our life, and that's stupid and that's dumb. Um, and this ties into what I was saying about the two parting ways. Teal just kind of comes to the assumption that they have to depart, but why? Why does she come to that conclusion? It's very silly. You were just talking to a person who was going on about there being infinite possibilities. Why do you come to this statement of, oh, I guess we have to depart? I guess this has to happen. I don't think it's wrong, but I think it should probably be something that the Wanderer gets into, not so much Teal. Teal shouldn't come to that conclusion. She doesn't really have any motivation to leave. In fact, she has motivation to stay. She's like I just said, she's developing these weird feelings. She feels like she's tied to the Wanderer by some sort of weird fate. Um, and we need to adjust this point of view to paint Teal's departure as kind of inevitable, something she knows has to and will happen because probably it's because the Wanderer says it has to happen. And not that she buys into it, but the Wanderer will probably just be like, no, it has happened. It will happen. It will always happen with this Teal and this Wanderer in this place. That is your branch. Unless it's not your branch, but it won't not be because I know it, girl. Sorry, hun. This one's yours. This one's your branch, and you're going straight to the end. And unless there's different ones along the way, well, they ain't you, sweetheart. Um, and we can use this. We can use this as a beautiful point to build on like this dreadful loneliness that the Wanderer knows. That the Wanderer knows that no matter this situation, Teal's gotta leave. Teal has to leave because they're not the Wanderer that accompanies her. They're not on that branch. They could be, but they're not because if they were, maybe it had already happened. Maybe it will happen, but it's not going to, right? And it gets kind of cloudy here because you're talking about infinity, but I don't know. Maybe they just lay down the rules. Maybe they just tell her like, nope, you are not the one. You are not the one who goes off this branch. Sorry, Toots. Um, okay, so yeah, I think this last point kind of sums up what I'm trying to say. We're not suggesting that she must continue to the bell tower. This is probably how Teal views it, but as if she has to complete her destiny, as if she has to complete her goal. What we're trying to suggest here is that no matter what, Teal's branch will end. No matter what, this Teal, who the Wanderer is talking to, their branch will end. All of the branches will. Not just hers, but every branch, all of the branches forever. That can kind of be the spin that the Wanderer takes. Like, no matter what I do, no matter what you do, the branches will end. And that can kind of be the cherry on top. This like haunting sentiment that no matter what the Wanderer does, no matter all of their cosmic infinite power, all of the branches end. All of it ends eventually. And that's just how it is. And this can maybe be something that we work into Teal's empathy. Teal like understands the dreadful woe of the end, right? It might not be on such a grand scale, but she kind of gets it. Um, we can kind of skip this next point. This is kind of just like wanderer flavor text here. You can read through it if you want to like pause the video and read, but it's kind of just talking about like the wanderer's viewpoint on that, on the like inevitable end of everything. Um, Speaking of the end, we're getting near the end of the chapter. We've got a little bit left to do. We've got one last page to get through here. I really like the ending. I really find it sweet. I think like the heartache, the bittersweetness. I love that Teal comes to this point where she's basically holding back tears because she has this strange attachment to a like space devil who just kind of like tricked her and then told her a bunch about quantum mechanics. Sorry, quantum physics. And I really like it. I really like the sweet tone, but I think reframing this last passage would do it wonders. I want this last bit to be a gut wrenching ordeal. Um, there's this part in which the Wanderer starts playing a song, and the song is meant to reflect the song that Teal recalled from her dreams, right? There was this beautiful waltz. We talked about it in which episode was that? We talked about it when we were talking about chapter 29 with the Swain, right? There was a beautiful waltz and it's really stuck with Teal, and even when she woke up, the song was kind of haunting her. She even tried to play it a little bit. Um that was earlier in this chapter. I don't think I ever actually talked about that, but she stops and she tries to play the songs from her dreams, but it doesn't work. She doesn't like keep up. Um and so during this instance, I like the idea. I like that the Wanderer is sort of forecasting once again, like, hey, I know you. I know you really deeply and really personally. I'm going to send you off with this song. It's too heavy handed to just say, oh, it reminds Teal of that song. I think we need to dig a little deeper, be a little more subtle, and use the same language, right? We need to use the same language that we were using to describe that song. We need to describe this song in an almost identical way so that readers go through it and they go, wait a minute, yeah, that's how the other song was described. Is so the Wanderer's playing that same song? That's pretty bonkers. Um, and it should be done in a way that is subtle but instantly recognizable to anybody who's been kind of paying attention to the book, right? We were very overt about telling the readers this song is important to Teal. This is how it sounds. And then when we get to this point, we say, hey, this is how this song sounds. Does that ring any bells? And readers should go, oh, yes, it does. Huh, thank you. Additionally, I really like the idea that maybe even the Wanderer kind of hums here, and their humming is maybe after, because essentially what happens, right, they have this little musical moment and the Wanderer says, listen, this is what's going to happen, this is what your branch does. You're going to count down from 3 to 0, and when you open your eyes, you're going to be at the bell tower. And Teal kind of just relents. She's like, okay, I guess. And then the Wanderer starts playing. Teal counts down, and when she does open her eyes, there she is in front of the bell tower, or like in front of the maze around the bell tower anyway. And it's in this moment, right? It should be after she says the 0 that the music stops. She knows something shifted, but there is still this cloying, haunting humming on the air. And maybe it's less distorted than earlier. Maybe it's not as creepy. And it shouldn't be, right? I want to inject this final note of humanity, quote unquote, into the Wanderer as their like last farewell. That the final bit of Teal that she hears of the Wanderer is warmth, is kindness, because, they kind of did do her a solid in the end. They expedited her journey despite it all. Or, maybe they did. It's kind of like impossible to say. It's alluded to, but the book doesn't say, oh yeah, the Wanderer did that. But yeah, I really like the idea that there's this last lingering note of humanity with the Wanderer as they have this departure. Um, and Teal at the end here is, I think it's just important to reiterate that she's not crying because the Wanderer is gone. And she's not really crying here. She's just kind of like sniveling. She's just really emotional, like I said. But I think a big part of it that we don't get into is that she's really emotional because she knows she can't go back. She knows she can't turn around now. She's so far ahead. Like her plan was to go back to the sage and kind of report, but she knows at this point in her heart that she can't and she won't. And she's fearful that the way ahead is fraught with uncertainty and danger. She's scared, she's heartbroken, she's miserable, and she's exhausted. And despite that all, she knows she's got to just keep pushing on. And we don't really exemplify any of that. We don't talk about any of those fine details. It's just like, I don't know. I don't want to be super overt with it. I think a lot of that is hidden in the subtext here. But to even build a frame for people to read, to understand, oh, yeah, there's subtext here, should be established. And it's just something we're leaving out of the text here, both subtext and text. And that's a really unfortunate exclusion we've established here, right? Like we're essentially just leaving it out because I don't want to talk about it right now. If we were to just have some hints here and there to suggest this, to suggest that the reason Teal is being really emotional is because of all of these factors, right? Super. You know, there's a gentle, delicate balance to presenting subtext. It has to kind of be there, right? You can't just assume people are going to pick up on subtext even though it's not there. Um, Sometimes it's important for things to just not be there, but if it's not there, it's because it's being excluded on purpose. This is just being excluded because I'm dumb. There should be some more emotional value to this departure here. And just additionally, right, like I was saying, this shouldn't be crying. This shouldn't be tearful. This should be Teal restraining, bottling everything up, frustration and pining and sorrow and longing and, like her exhaustion, etc., etc. We cannot let Teal cry here, and that's terrible. We cannot let her cry. She can maybe dab away some tears on her sleeve and, do whatever it is sad half elves do, but we cannot physically let her cry here, which is awful. I hate that I have to say that, but she can't cry here because we have to save the crying for later on. We have to save the crying for the nadir of her misery, which happens later on in chapter 38. And that's why we need the one instance of Teal being able to freely weep be such a heavy hitting moment, because Teal has been holding it in this entire time. And even here, when she's super emotional, when she's really distraught, she stops herself, right? She stops herself. She wads up her fist. She knows she has to keep going. She dabs away the wetness on her eyelashes and she proceeds. Right? She bottles things up. She fails to reflect one final time, and then she keeps going forward. This is just one final thing, right? Throughout this last part, the Wanderers stopped rhyming. Oops. They stopped their mania. Oops. And I know we did that. I know I did that to make them a little more empathetic, to make them more believable, to make them more likable here. But we've dropped so much of their consistency for the sake of emotion. And I don't think that, I think it's worth it. I think the emotion here by the end of the chapter is great, but we've dropped so much characterization that, the Wanderer doesn't feel like the Wanderer by the end of this chapter, and that's not good. They kind of they've like shifted perspectives. They've lost out on too much of their characterization. It should, like, I don't have a great idea of how to do this, but even as they're having this really kind-hearted, this really heartfelt goodbye with Teal, they should still come off as completely unhinged. They should still be rhyming, they should still be laughing, they should still be hard to understand, but we should be able to push through that. Now that we know who the Wanderer is and kind of what they represent, we should, as readers, and Teal as a being in this scene who's like experiencing the same things, she and us should be able to push aside that insanity, that zany quality, and see the core of what the Wanderer is trying to get across, that they are being kind in this moment, that they are being sweet, they are accepting and reciprocating Teal's gentle kindness. Um, I think a great way to do that while maintaining their characterization is to soften their font. We've been talking a lot about using different fonts for different characters by exemplifying them visually. Obviously, the wanderer of all characters is going to have a very, very identifiable font. And this is something we've kind of been playing with, that maybe it's been coming up a little bit here and there. Maybe it's been cropping up in Teal's insanity here and there. Maybe this is just a manifestation of Teal's insanity. But here at the end of the chapter, during their, heartfelt goodbye, this font should soften somewhat. I don't think it would change styles really drastically, maybe to something like similar. Once again, I really have no great idea how to tackle the whole I want the font to represent a visual element in my book conundrum, but if I get over that hurdle, if it ends up just having to be like custom made fonts, then okay, here is a great spot for when, the italics gets hit and the font softens somewhat. Maybe it goes from being hard edges, very straight hard edges, to being rounded and soft. Some element, some form of visual display that exemplifies that the wanderer has softened, that they are, despite their manic and hard to pin down exterior, what they're expressing is a benevolence, a I don't think quite honorable is the right word, but they are almost tending to Teal, almost making sure she's okay, um, being patient with her and looking after her, right? Because the last act they do for her is making sure she's like comfortable and is left with this sweet memory. And but like, are they, right? Because she ends up like pining, and she's feeling pretty torn up about this whole goodbye. If they had just said see you later alligator, would Teal feel better about the whole situation? That's it's hard to say, but I think we should really take effort here to push the idea that by the end of the chapter, the wanderer has softened, has, maybe they like Teal. Maybe they kind of want to be friends with her. Maybe this wanderer thinks Teal is the best third dimensional being they've ever met. I wouldn't put it that way overtly in the text, but we can suggest some of those ideas via this visual aid we're gunning for in the future. And hey, folks, with that, we are a little over 2.5 hours, but we freaking made it. It only took us, Jesus, altogether, what are we at? 5.5 hours of yammering to get through all of chapter 35. Here is chapter 36, Hero. We're going to talk about that next week. Chapter 36 is a doozy. It's actually not at all. It's pretty short compared to the past two. The next two chapters are like normal people chapters. I promise you the notes for chapter 36 are not 32 pages long. We will not be doing a two-part episode on chapter 36. Hopefully you have enjoyed this extensive discussion on the Wanderer and the insanity that is chapter 35. It is one of my favorite segments of the book, and I hope to do it due diligence going forward. I hope I can make it even better in the future iterations of the book. That's all I got, folks. My throat's starting to go a little hoarse. Starting to go a little snaky. Um, do I have any other funny animal noises in me? I don't think I do. I'm too tired for this gag. I'm going to head out, everyone. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. It's always a good time to talk about my book with my pals here on the internet. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your whatevers whenever you happen to be listening or viewing this series. I'm going to head out. I'm going to go get a snack and then flop into my bed and fall asleep. Maybe I'll play Fortnite. I probably won't. That would be kind of funny if I did, though. I'll probably lose. Hopefully you enjoyed chapter 35. We'll pick things up next week with chapter 36, The Hero. And I will see you all then. Bye for now, folks. Thanks for coming.